I think you're right. We live in a kind of we live in a society where morality is subjected by this kind of like, oh well, what you think is right for you is right for you. What I think is right for me is right for me, and we can't say that there are some things that are always right and always wrong. But I don't actually think in reality people live that way or actually believe that. So. To use the example that you used earlier, no one thinks that sexual assault in any circumstance is okay. Would you agree with me? Yeah. So I don't know why you think that is the case. Peter was putting forward the case for a natural law, which is saying it's by virtue of our human nature that gives us certain rights, which means that we cannot be acted against in a certain way, and that's what gives us our moral standing.
So I think the point here is that the one thing that allows us to make moral adjudications in common is the one thing we have in common, which is human reason. We are rational human beings. We have the inherent capacities and potentialities of reason, and so consequently, using natural reason, we can discern together moral norms. And those moral norms, as I've advocated, as we would say, come from the natural law. That is to say, when we apply our reason to our nature, we find that there are purposes within the faculties of our nature that if we fulfill them, constitute human flourishing, which is the good for us. And the reason why it's moral goodness is because we can choose whether to fulfill it or not. That's what morality is all about. It's about choice. But the choice to do good or to not do good, which is evil. When you don't do the good, you do evil. You do the lack of the good. So that's the whole point of morality. Morality is not a subjective thing. It doesn't just matter. It's not just a matter of subjective opinion, like I like this music or you like that music. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about our moral norms and moral values that we use our reason, looking at something outside ourselves, human nature, to discern moral norms from. That gives us therefore an objective sense of morality, and that's what we can use to commonly adjudicate that abortion, as the killing of innocent human beings, is morally impermissible. Now, the other side have to give, therefore, an alternative account of moral norms that actually says the opposite, and that's what they have failed so far to do.
Yeah, so I agree that morality is not subjective, but morality is responsive to individual interests, and individual interests are different for different people. So it is an objective moral truth that we ought to respect people's interests as long as those interests do not conflict with other people's interests. So.
Why?
Because that's the best rule of living together. So you have to respect. Because okay, I can't go deeper than the principle that we should not harm other people. We should not let other people suffer. Because I can't go deeper than that in finding moral value. So, but the fact that we shouldn't harm other people, we shouldn't cause other people unnecessary suffering, that's wrong. Because people have an interest in not suffering, in not being harmed. And that's the basic. People have many other interests, and we should try as much as possible to respect other people's interests, and that's an objective truth. Fetuses do not have interests, so they are not within the field of moral protection.
Would you like to add anything?
Well, only that I do think it's quite difficult to look at morals as just being almost like objectively defined and set in stone for all time, almost drawn from some kind of force external to ourselves, because, as I understand it, Peter will correct me on this if I'm wrong, he knows way more Latin than I do, but my understanding is that the word moral is drawn from the Latin moralis, which means proper behaviour. And when we talk about morals, we're generally talking about the proper behaviour and standards that a society applies to itself and that we apply to ourselves as individuals. And people will draw that from different ends. You might draw it from Catholicism or from a particular religious belief, or you might draw it from a different set of principles. And what happens is that in society, sometimes moral standpoints and moral positions are contested. And this is a real area for this. Because if you look at what's happening in this debate, both sides here will say that human life is supremely important. But then when you scratch down below it, what you find is that the element of human life that we think is supremely important is a bit different. And that depends a little bit on what we value. So Peter and Joe will say, well, it's the biology of human life that's important. I would say, I don't know well enough to be able to make assumptions about it, but I would say something different about human life. It's our capacity to know and feel and act in a particular way that's really important. The Greeks actually solved this quite simply because they had two words for life. They had zoe, which was the biology of life, and bios, which is the life as it is lived. And I guess in some ways what we're both doing is positing a different moral entry point onto this. For Peter, the most crucial thing in the world, and Joe, is not ending the biological life. For me, it's not taking away the capacities that as humans we have and enjoy that are specific to us being human.